Hi everybody, and welcome back to my house. Gosh, it's just started to snow outside, and the sun is shining. We've got a winter storm warning just when I got my path all cleared off. Thank you very much for being there right now, and I hope everybody's well. I just got off a Zoom conference call with the Hospice of Haines board, so we were all talking about ways that we can help right now with all kinds of stuff, and it's hard because we're all distant, but that's where we are right now. And so this morning I'm going to read to you, which I think is a good thing to do. It's good for me, so I hope it's good for you. This is chapter 3 of Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, and it's called You Do Not Know, and the epigram in front of it is "Watch, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight or at cock crow." And that's from Mark chapter 13, verse 35. And this is interesting that this is today that I'm reading this chapter. It's really weird, and in maybe a good way, because this is actually the anniversary of my accident, April 7th, 2005, and I'm recording this on April 7th, 2020. So usually this day is a little bit wiggy for me, and you're helping making it better. Chapter 3, You Do Not Know. I said I'd tell you more about my accident, and I will. But first I want to share a couple of uncanny occurrences that happened right before I was run over. Instructional moments that I don't think were just coincidences. If this were a novel, they would be considered heavy foreshadowing. Here's the first one. I had been spring cleaning like crazy, washing all the windows inside and out, hauling bags full of clothes to the Salvation Army, airing blankets, dusting bookshelves, and scrubbing floors. I even mucked out and hosed down the chicken coop, making it all fresh and clean. Then I decided to move to our bedroom up to the 3rd floor. Then I decided to move our bedroom up to the 3rd floor so that Chip and I could have our own bathroom. This used to be our older daughter's attic sanctuary, but they were both in college now and could share our old room on the 2nd floor when they were home for the summer or Christmas vacation. I made Sarah's tiny room our closet and filled up Eliza's cozy room with our bed and night tables. It's small and tucked under the eaves, but has a great window overlooking the Chilkat Inlet and the mountains. I decided to paint both rooms a deep blue to match the spring sky. I was on a ladder rolling the walls in the bedroom when the safety report came on the radio. Fireman Al Badgley and volunteer Travis Reed were giving the weekly talk. And yes, he is really called Fireman Al. Officially, he's the training officer for the volunteer fire department, but he's really the guy who responds to just about every ambulance call. There were 250 on the nose last year, according to Al. The only time Al doesn't go on a call is when he's out of town, on vacation, or fishing too far from the dock. I have seen him leave his pew in the middle of the prayers, walk out during a commencement speech at high school graduation, and drop his burger, grab his jacket, and leave his family at the Elks Club weekly hamburger feed. He's even left a funeral where he was supposed to be a pallbearer. Some days he has many calls. 3 a.m., a young woman has been cut in a drunken fight with her boyfriend. 1 p.m., a boy has broken his wrist playing basketball in gym class. 5 p.m., a woman has slipped on the ice in front of the grocery store and hit her head. 7 p.m., an elderly man thinks he's having a heart attack. Every single one of these people is better off because Al was there, speaking in his soft, ever so slightly goofy Texas way, competently assessing the situation and directing the crew. Al's wife is the choir director at the Presbyterian Church. They have a son and a daughter, and his widowed mother comes up from Texas and stays with them every summer. When he's not on an ambulance call or at the fire hall, Al likes to fish and hunt. He celebrated his 50th birthday a few years back with a Sunday afternoon potluck picnic at the church. Built like a wiry cowboy, he just about always wears dark blue work pants, a matching shirt, and leather work boots. He has a bushy mustache, and his wife cuts his flyaway brown hair. At the annual lighting of the library Christmas tree this year, a little girl walked up to Al, who was sitting down nibbling on a plate of homemade cookies, sushi, and cheese and crackers from the potluck spread. He had already saved the day when an audio speaker from the PA system fell off the wall. Luckily, it missed hitting our dear elder Macy Jones, but it nicked a boy kneeling next to Maisie's chair. Al stemmed the bleeding, opened the library first aid kit, and applied a butterfly bandage to the boy's forehead. He assured everyone the child was okay, and the ceremony continued with a reading of the fire scene from A Child's Christmas in Wales, the one in which they throw snowballs into the steamy house and the tiny old aunt asks the firemen if they'd like anything to read. I'm not making this up. I was the reader. But back to my story. Al was eating, and this solemn, blonde-haired little girl, Sally Chapel is her name, said, "I know you. You're Fireman Al." And he said, "Yes, I am." And then she said, "You help people." And he said, "I do my best." And then she asked him if he would fix her shoe because the strap on her Mary Jane's had come unbuckled. Al pulled her up into his lap and fastened it. Now, in my drop cloth draped spring bedroom, Al and Travis were still talking on the radio, keeping me company and reminding drivers to watch for pedestrians and cyclists since more people were out enjoying the warm spring weather. Most accidents occur within a mile of home, Al was saying. Then he warned that if someone does get hurt, if there's a not so great situation with a person on the ground or some such scenario, be sure not to move that person. Travis, who is a river rafting guide and younger and hipper than Al, jumped in and told us to be sure to identify someone specific who will call 911. Look right at him or her and say, "Yo, dude, call 911. And tell the dispatcher where you are, what's going on, and give them as many details as you possibly can to prepare the ambulance crew." We sometimes call the safety report the DUH report at our house because, with all due respect to Al, what person doesn't know not to set up a Christmas tree next to the wood stove? On the other hand, the lessons Al has taught our community about fire safety have kept Haines relatively blaze-free for 20 years. Al became a fireman after accidentally burning down his parents' cabin. No one was hurt, but the log home was reduced to coals. You could say he's been on a mission ever since to prevent that from happening to some other college kid. He also has greatly increased the expertise of the volunteer ambulance crew. Al, like me, the obituary writer, is part of the local death beat that works together when someone dies. Haines doesn't have a funeral parlor, so it's Al who brings the ambulance, that is also the hearse, and who asks members of the ambulance crew to help him pick up the body. And it's Al who often helps other volunteers prepare the body for burial. Al even watches over the corpse, as the morgue is in a garage at the fire hall, where he works. This is something about right now that has been weighing on me. Our morgue is just a little, like I said, it's the garage behind the fire hall, and it can hold 2 people in it. And recently, Al, as part of the emergency operations committee still, even though he's retired, he and the rest of the committee have put in place a portable morgue that arrived in town last week. It's a big refrigerator container that can hold, I think they said, up to 20. So that's making us stay at home. We don't have a case yet of COVID-19 in Haines that we know of. Anyway, back to then. Fireman Al had played a big part in a near-death experience story I'd been working on recently for the Chilkat Valley News. Gladys Meacock had survived a bizarre and enlightening occurrence the previous summer, and after months of rehabilitation was finally back home and able to talk about it. The day Gladys almost died was just about perfect. Her orchard was loaded with cherries, and her husband George was mowing the big field behind the house. Above him, eagles glided in the thermals in the shadow of Mount Rapinski. Across the bluff from the Meacock homestead, silver salmon swam up the Chilkat River. It was an idyllic Alaskan scene. All that was missing was a cow moose and her calf. It wasn't the kind of morning you'd think anything bad could happen. Not that anyone would expect to be almost killed hanging laundry on the line. 1 minute, Gladys had been pinning up a rug. The next, she was on the ground, unable to move her arms and legs. She had broken her neck. There are more than a few folks around here who, on a brightly polished day like the one Gladys almost died on, would look around and think that if they had to make the choice right then between their backyard and heaven, they'd stay put. So it's not that surprising that Gladys felt the same way, even after glimpsing what she is sure were the Elysian fields. I better get that, just a second. Hello? Hi, James, how are you? Can I just call you back in just a little bit? Give me about 15 minutes, okay? All right, thank you. Okay, all right. Okay, before 11. All right, bye-bye. Sorry, I figured I should get that, just in case, but now I better get back to the... It is interesting that I haven't had the usual interruptions that I usually have here. It's been so quiet, so of course then I had a phone call. Anyway, we were with Gladys, and she was on the ground, and she broke her neck. What you need to know first, though, is that Gladys is a retired science teacher in her early 70s who spent most of her career working in a juvenile detention facility in Anchorage. Gladys's heart knows something mystical happened that day, but the science teacher in her thinks that the tingly, out-of-body sensation she experienced may be the result of a, quote, visual brain pattern triggered by the severe trauma, unquote. The Meacock's clothesline had been made for Gladys's by then deceased mother-in-law, Mary. It was a wire cable strung between a pole in the ground and another pole on a small platform 4 steps up. The raised line kept the bottom of the sheets out of the snow in the winter and looked a bit like a dock on a sea of grass in the summer. Gladys was standing up there, securing a heavy rug, when the cable apparently snapped from wear or weight, no one is really sure. And rather than let go of it, Gladys reflexively grabbed on tight and, as she said, became the whip end of a lashing cable. At first, her husband and the EMTs thought she had tripped and fallen off the platform, but that didn't explain how she was so badly hurt. It just wasn't that far to drop. Strangely, Gladys woke up on the warm lawn and felt wonderful, better than she ever had. She was wrapped in a blanket of bliss. I had no thought of anything or anybody, she said, and there was this strange orange golden light. Gladys is not prone to fancy, but on this day she heard very clearly a voice that she is sure belonged to the ghost of her mother-in-law, Mary, another strong-armed and clear-headed Meacock woman who never would have stood for Gladys being killed by her old clothesline in her old backyard. I heard Mary clear as day. Breathe, she said, breathe in and breathe out. So Gladys sucked in some air and exhaled more, and the magic feeling left, replaced by a barge load of pain and fear. I knew right then this would be my darkest hour. Gladys said, deepening her voice, leaning in and opening her big blue Eskimo eyes extra wide. Her husband called 911 and Fireman Al arrived. Gladys thinks the most important decision Al made was to believe her when she said she couldn't move and that it hurt terribly. And even though it was a lovely day and there was no real explanation at the time for what had happened, Al treated her as if she had a serious spine injury, the kind people incur in car accidents or falling off roofs. Gladys told me that she believes part of the reason she didn't die and wasn't paralyzed was that she stayed alert and communicated what she was feeling and thinking to Al and his crew. She never quit talking, even though it hurt so much that she was tempted to just close her eyes. But she really did not want to die that way on that day right then. Gladys was not ready to shed her mortal coil just yet. I thought about all of this as I stood on the ladder painting my room. Al was still talking on the radio. He'd moved on to the hazards of spring boating. You can't always predict what the weather will do. A nice calm day can change fast, so wear a life jacket and bring extra fuel and some means to make the boat go if the engine quits, an oar, or what have you. Travis chimed in with, "You definitely don't want to get yourself up a you-know-what creek without a paddle. Like the scouts say, be prepared." Or Mark's gospel says, "You do not know when the master of the house will come." We don't know when God will tap us on the shoulder and say, "Time's up." So watch, pay attention. And as Pastor Ron Horn said at Wilma Henderson's funeral, do good. I had much more on my mind a few days later on the first real spring day of the year while I was riding my bike for the second time since the previous fall and mentally planning my first book tour, which would begin in 6 weeks in Boston and take me to Denver, Salt Lake City, the Bay Area, Portland, Seattle, Bellingham, and then up to Fairbanks, Anchorage, and down to Juneau before ending up back home in Haines. I wouldn't be in any town or city for more than 2 days, and I'd be alone. I had never been gone from my children or my husband that long. I'm not a traveler. I get homesick in Juneau. I'm terrified of flying. 3 of my next-door neighbors have died in small plane crashes. I'm even more afraid of big jets. They fly so high and fast that I can't imagine having to land on, say, a rock-free strip of beach or an old logging road if the weather closed in or an engine quit. So Dr. Feldman, or Len, I call him both. It's Dr. Feldman in the office and Len when he's out in his garden across the road from mine, gives me just enough Valium pills to take one for each leg of the trip whenever I must travel across the state or the country. My extended family lives in New York. My in-laws are in Virginia and Florida. I might not like planes, but I love my bicycle. It's a Trek road bike made out of carbon fiber and light enough to lift with 2 fingers. It's nicer than my old Subaru. Riding my bicycle fast may be as close as I'll come to finding that peace they promise in church, the one that passes all understanding. When I'm riding 20 miles an hour with a tailwind drafting behind another rider, I think it must be what nirvana feels like. And it's good for me. Just dressing for the ride had given me pleasure. I had on my padded shorts, tights, warm jersey, helmet, gloves, and neon orange wind jacket. This was an easy ride. It takes me a few outings each spring to become reacquainted with my pedaling muscles and with the skinny seat. As I rode, I was thinking about all of the changes in my life that the publication of my first book might bring. I practiced answering imaginary questions from Oprah. Why, Oprah asks in my daydreaming head, would anyone be interested in the life of an obituary writer in Haines, Alaska? I think a minute, taking in the lights, the couch, all those people, Oprah's imposing and successful self, and reply, I have no freaking idea. Cut to commercial and my short, happy career as an author is over. I was breathing hard as I pedaled up Cemetery Hill. I sat up tall, going up over the top, realizing that I couldn't worry about an interview that would never happen. Instead, I had to plan how I was going to survive the trips to bookstores, the readings, the travel. If I don't overcome my fear of flying, I thought, I may not be able to even do the tour. If I take drugs for each leg of the trip, I'll be dopey the whole time. Also, what will I wear? If I'm an author now, then I should dress like one. Should I buy a silk scarf? What would I do with it? Toss it over my shoulder and pretend as if I always dress this way? Like it's not a costume in a play? Do women writers wear tweed jackets, or are they only for men? I had bought new shoes, but they were green running style shoes. Green canvas. Pea green canvas. Oh God, what was I thinking? Thoreau was right when he said to be wary of anything that requires new clothes, because that's what was on my mind. That's what I was thinking as I glided down the otherwise empty late morning street on a calm, clear spring morning when the black pickup stopped at the intersection and its driver glanced quickly around and then pulled right out in front of me. He didn't hear my yells, so I turned toward a ditch, planning to copy Lance Armstrong when he avoided a pileup of wrecked riders in the Tour de France by cutting across a field. Instead of guiding my bike as if it were a runaway horse across the grass and back up onto the pavement, then heading off to a stage victory in the first yellow jersey for a woman in the Tour de France, my tires skidded on sand left over from winter snowplows. I fell down with a pop, the sound my cycling shoes made as they came unclipped from the pedals, and the beautiful bike slipped out from under me and clattered away. Dragging my gloved hands on the road to slow myself down, I prayed I'd stop before I went under the truck. Please, God, don't let the wheel run over my head. I slid like that, sitting up, legs out, hands back, my whole body tensed and flexed, right between the front and rear wheels. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna just read this, but this is hard today. Just know that I'm okay now, okay? The back tire of the new King Cab 3/4 ton Chevy pickup rolled right over my lap. My face was inches from the bright chrome hubcap. I could have kissed the raised chevron. I felt a kind of whoomp, and my abdomen, lower back, and upper leg suddenly hurt so bad that I couldn't breathe. Is this it? I thought. Am I gonna die like this? I mean, whatever happened to woman's intuition? Shouldn't I have some? I had just been, quite literally, run over by an effing truck, and I didn't sense it coming. Maybe this is how it is with all deaths. Maybe death catches us all by surprise. A year later, visiting my mother in her last hours, drained as she was from the chemotherapy, asleep and never waking, I kept looking at her one eyebrow, raised in a question mark. You can't interview a dead person for her obituary. I have always wanted to meet a ghost, but none has ever appeared at the foot of my bed. Like most of us, I know only of near misses, nothing of what happens when all the lights go out on Earth. Still, I thought, there had to be more to the end of my life than this. I waited a second. I was still alive. Kevin, the driver, ran toward me, calling my name. He's the manager of the big grocery store on Main Street. His girlfriend graduated from Haines High in my daughter's class. My friend Joanne charged off her nearby deck across the lawn towards us, her newest spaniel, a black cocker named Harry, barking after her. I had just waved hello to Joanne moments earlier. I was now down on the ground just as Gladys had been. I thought about her, and Al, and the lesson I'd learned so recently, and everything both sped up and moved very slowly. When my oldest daughter was in grade school, a state trooper spoke to her class. He had said he had seen people die because they were afraid, because they thought they would die, and that he had seen people survive those same kinds of situations because they weren't afraid and didn't think they would die. He gave an example of a fellow trooper who was shot through a door he was knocking on. He was hit in the shoulder. It should not have been a life-threatening injury, but he died of the traumatic surprise. He thought the shot was fatal, and so it became. I wanted to live, and I made a deal with God. I'll take the wheelchair if I can still move my arms. I don't want to live like Christopher Reeve had, but I could live like Dave Olerud. I feel bad about not wanting to survive if it meant I'd be quadriplegic, and I mean no disrespect to people who are, but that's how I felt when faced with the actual painful possibility. It may be shameful to admit, but I don't believe I could live an immobile life. I am not strong enough. Dave Olerud, a former school teacher and owner of the local sporting goods store, lost the use of his legs in a construction accident. He was putting up a wall during a happy community barn-raising style event at the American Bald Eagle Foundation's Natural History Center when something went terribly wrong and the wall fell back on the volunteers. He was crushed underneath it. Today, Dave is another part of the puzzle of my survival. I remembered that he didn't just close his eyes and died. He hadn't, so I wouldn't. Same with Gladys. Even now, looking back on all of this, almost 4 years later, heck, 15 years later to the day, my chagrin has not faded over the irony of my column running in that day's Anchorage Daily News, the one that people across Alaska were reading as I lay in the road bleeding, being headlined, Matters of Life and Death. I mean, it's funny when you think about it. The column was all about Gladys surviving her broken neck and a fisherman who fell through the ice while clamming and saw a bright light as well. Unlike those two, I could see clearly. No flashes of heaven blinded me. Peace didn't blanket me, and I didn't feel any warm glow. I didn't want to. I willfully stayed, as my friend and fellow Hospice of Haines volunteer Beth McCready would say, present. Beth practices Eastern-style meditation in a hut she built for this purpose on the beach. I didn't even close my eyes in case they wouldn't reopen. I prayed, whispering fast to make sure my message arrived in time. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus Christ. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. I said it the right way. Usually, I modify the Hail Mary with pray for us now in the hour of our need, omitting the sinning and death parts because they seem so melodramatic. Not that day. Heeding a lesson from the interview with Gladys, I told Kevin not to touch me. He might make things worse. And remembering the instructions from the radio safety report, I looked right into Joanne's eyes and said, Joanne, dial 911 and tell Al that Heather's been hit by a car. I did not see or hear any angel choirs flying close to the ground, but I did see Dave Olerud spinning his wheelchair with a laughing grandchild on his lap. Please, I prayed, let me have that much. Before I go on, there is one other thing that you need to know. Kevin wasn't drunk or speeding or doing anything reckless. He just didn't see me. He wasn't paying that close attention. It could have been any one of us behind the wheel. It could have been me or you driving that truck. 3 months later, after I was well enough to have Travis and Fireman Al and the other volunteer EMTs who had responded to the call over to the house for a thank you potluck, they said that they still couldn't believe I'd been run over and was able to speak to them and explain the circumstances. Travis, who was usually glib and breezy, teared up when he saw me. He said he was grateful I had survived. He hadn't thought I would. Back then, I didn't want to know more. I was still too busy recovering to worry about what might have happened the day of the accident. But recently, I asked Travis to explain why he thought I kept talking and appeared to be better off than I was. I had hoped he'd say it might be a miracle or that I was extra brave. Instead, he said, it's simple. You were in shock. Then he said, "Shit, Heather, you should have been dead. You had tire tracks on your abdomen and you were talking about how you hadn't shaved your legs." It was real bad. People die of broken pelvises all the time. If we hadn't been there so fast, if you had been alone, and if it had taken any longer to reach you or get you to Seattle, your pelvic girdle would have collapsed on itself, closing blood vessels, crushing nerves, puncturing. You'd basically bleed out. He may have noticed a look of horror on my face, because then he said, more gently, that there was one thing that had been in my favor. "Faith?" I asked. "No, I don't know about that," he said. Unlike Al, Travis is not a churchgoer. Or I guess it could be, yes, if faith is the same as fortitude. Your conditioning. You were athletic and in good shape. That's what I think saved you. There is a will to live, and you definitely had that too. But sometimes the will to live isn't enough. It wasn't for my mother. Faith wasn't either. Travis then said something I'd remember later. People who want to live fight a lot harder. While I was lying in the road before the ambulance came, Joanne, Kevin, and a police officer were with me, all watching for traffic. There really wasn't any. Just one small white car came up the hill. Out jumped the kid who had bagged my groceries the day before. He was new in town. He had red hair. I didn't know his name. I took this to be a terrible omen. After all, my book was titled, "If You Lived Here, I'd Know Your Name." He came close, knelt down next to my head, and asked if he could do anything. His hand shook as he lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and exhaled into my face. "Mind if I smoke?" he asked. I almost said, "No, go ahead." That's what I always say, even though I don't like cigarette smoke at all. But I do like to please. I never want to be confrontational, and I understood that smoking is an addiction. Also, we were outside. It's not as if we were eating. He took another puff. The pain radiating out of my back and belly was terrible. The worst you can imagine. It felt like I'd been hit by a truck. It was hard to breathe, and I was dizzy. I thought, I don't want my last words to be a lie, especially a lie to make someone like me. I said, "Yes, I do mind if you smoke." Well, he flicked that cigarette away so far you would have thought it was a lit firecracker. Then he asked if there was anything else he could do for me, and I said to hurry and find my husband. He took off down the hill to our lumberyard where Chip works. When he was told Chip was at the post office, he raced over there and yelled for him to come quick, which pretty much assured that half the town knew what had happened before I made it to the clinic. My friend Becky met us there with our daughter JJ and son Christian. She had taken them out of school. The youngest, Stoli, was at a track meet in Juneau. The oldest two, Eliza and Sarah, were away at college. Remember, I'd been painting their rooms. Becky told me later that she thought they would never see me again. The clinic staff cinched my middle together and put me in an air body cast, readying me for the medevac to Seattle. This is how emergencies work in remote Alaskan communities without hospitals. Even the Juneau hospital was too small for this kind of trauma, so they called an air ambulance service that flew a prop ambulance plane up from Juneau and then took Chip and me to Sitka, where I was transferred on a stretcher to an ambulance Learjet that had flown up from Seattle to meet us and bring us the rest of the way. We flew down the coast of Alaska and British Columbia to Seattle's Harborview Medical Center. The jet landed at Boeing Field instead of SeaTac Airport because it's closer to the hospital. A four-wheeled ambulance met us there. I don't remember much about what happened that night, but know that early the next morning, my smashed pelvis was put back together by a team of surgeons, which included, I was told, the best pelvic doctor on the West Coast. Maybe the country. Dr. Chip Rout. I took his name, the same as my husband's, as a good omen. 6 bones were snapped. Teacup fractures is how the nurse described them. Since the pelvis bones are connected loops, if one side breaks, the other does as well, like the handle of a china cup. This is why everything felt squishy. I also cracked my sacrum, that blade in the lower back just above the nub that used to be a tail. Important nerves run through the little holes in it. Going into surgery, Dr. Rout's colleague from Texas, Dr. Please Call Me Joe Conflitti, who would operate on me with him, held my hand and said I had a 50-50 chance of walking again. Turns out I got the good half of the odds. And as Becky would say, it was a miracle that no organs were harmed. After a few months in bed, I would learn to walk again. In 9 months, the good doctors promised I'd be 80% back to my old self. When I was able to leave Seattle 3 weeks later, a wheelchair van took Chip and me to the airport. I was scared when the flight attendants carried me into my seat. I didn't want them to drop me. I was also embarrassed to be wearing a diaper. I wouldn't be able to leave my seat until I was carried off the jet and placed back in my wheelchair in Juneau. It was hard to ask for so much help just to enter and exit a plane and to have all those people looking at me, and especially Chip, with such sympathy. My circumstance was temporary. Imagine if this were my life, our life. Imagine how quickly everything would change if this were your life. Imagine it. What would you do? How would you handle it? This is another reason why Chip kept reminding me that I was very lucky. I didn't want to wet the diaper. I really didn't. So Chip helped me use the handicap bathroom in the terminal before boarding the plane. The door to the only unisex one was locked, so we waited for about 5 minutes. It didn't surprise me. I knew by then that bathroom visits with a wheelchair take a lot longer than they do without one. When the door finally opened, a tailored, suited, blue-tied businessman smelling of cologne strode quickly out. He had left the sink dirty from his shave. I didn't wish he'd get hit by a truck. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Instead, I wished Tanya Harding would whack him in the knee really hard with a baseball bat. As the jet took off, I looked out the window at Seattle dropping away, at the toy houses and ribbon roads with all the little cars moving along them, and at the tiny boats on the flat lakes and wavy sound, and I realized that something was missing. It took being almost killed while doing something so normal, so non-life-threatening as riding a bike down a quiet street in Haines on a sunny April day to banish my fear of flying. I know it may seem like a small gift, but at the time, it was huge. With considerable help from OxyContin and morphine, I had been granted what that popular prayer requests, the serenity to accept something I couldn't change. Also, I was so happy to be finally leaving the sleepless in Seattle nursing home that I would have had the courage to take a hang glider home. The extra painkillers they gave me for the long day of traveling made it impossible to concentrate on a book. And there was no movie on the 2.5-hour flight, so I watched one in my head about what really happened that April morning. It begins with me coasting down the hill overlooking Portage Cove, where skiffs troll in the sunshine for the season's first king salmon. The mountains still have snow on them, and they look so white against the blue, blue sky. The harbor is almost flat, calm, and a deep blue-green. In the distance, a dog barks, a chainsaw starts up, and a small plane banks along the side of Mount Rapinski towards Skagway. I am smiling and happily pedaling through the middle of my life in the middle of an otherwise ordinary morning. I wave to my good friend Joanne, and suddenly a truck pulls out in front of me. Then the scene cuts to God's control room, which is a hybrid of the library at Yale and the CNN set, and that angel Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life looks down at me through binoculars and says, "Whoa, Lord, it's not her day yet." He does the best he can to help, but like me, he's a bit of a bumbler. They can always tell when I'm running up the stairs to the newspaper office because I usually trip at least once. So even though he saves me, I still break my pelvis. This may be part of the reason why, when I saw, in this order, Dave Olrud's son Doug, and his dad's wheelchair accessible van waiting to pick us up at the ferry terminal. The lights of Haines reflecting in Portage Cove on the drive through town, our house, our dogs, our children, our friend and neighbor Linus, who had held it all together for us while we were gone. Everyone cried but me. Chip was right. I was so lucky to be alive and so lucky to be home. I had been spared to see another day, this day. Everyone was so proud of the recovery room they'd made me in an alcove of the living room that they wheeled me right over. We don't have a downstairs bedroom, and remember, my new room was now all the way up in the attic. It seemed as if half the town had helped create my new digs. For the next 2 months, we would be brought dinners every night and more cookies, soups, and casseroles than we could eat. The kids and Linus had a list of credits for the improvements. Nancy got the hospital bed. It's from the Emblem Club, Christian said. The bed was right in the front window overlooking the beach. So they had put up a curtain rod and sewed white sheets into drapes for privacy. Sue ironed them, JJ said, and then lifted up a heavy shopping bag. Fan mail, can you believe it? It was from readers of my column and the new book. Stoli showed me the bright quilt Becky had sewed. It was yellow and had chickens on it. Why did the chickens stay off the road? So it wouldn't get run over by a truck, was written on the corner in fabric marker. Our friend Tim and neighbor Greg made the ramps I'd been wheeled into the house on and more out the back door so I could sit on the deck in sunny weather. They had built an enclosure on the porch that doubled as an outhouse and a shower. The door of our bathroom wasn't wide enough for my wheelchair. A hose ran along the outside of the house and through a window so it could be connected to the kitchen faucet for warm water. There was a colorful shower curtain and a plastic bench with a potty seat under it. That's from the Emblem Club too, Christian said. He was extra polite and quiet. I wished I could hug him. I regretted fibbing over the phone. I wasn't ever doing wheelies in the nursing home. I had lied when I said Chip and I played cribbage all day and that I'd beat him. The only time of each day I was peppy was on the phone with the kids. Since I'd been gone, I'd lost about 20 pounds and my eyes had dark circles around them. I could tell this wasn't what any of them had expected. I would not be able to use the cute back porch shower and outhouse for weeks. The potty had to be moved inside, closer to my bed. They would all have to learn to slide me on and off it without my feet ever touching the ground. Even though I wasn't paralyzed, it seemed like it, since I could bear no weight at all on my healing bones. That's the cuckoo clock. Perfect timing for this next line. It was after midnight when we said goodbye to Linus, and I kissed everyone goodnight. Chip tucked me in, and my little dog Phoebe jumped up next to me. The two big dogs thumped their tails at a respectful distance. Chip opened the windows to let the beach air in. The kids had put the screens in for me. They knew I liked the sounds and scents of the beach. In the late spring twilight we call night in Alaska, we listened to the sea lions exhaling, the gulls calling, the waves meeting the shore. Robert Frost was wrong. There is a greater devotion than the shore to the ocean. It's a husband who will help you with the bedpan and the wiping up, and then say you are beautiful when you look as bad as you ever have in your life. The deep line Chip had been holding in his forehead since the accident softened. There was a lot I wanted to say to him, but all I could manage was good night. He whistled softly as he made up his bed on the window seat at the other end of our living room, where he'd stay until I got better, so I could call him in the night if I needed to go to the bathroom or take another pain pill. Sorry, I thought I was going to breeze through this. It's really good to be home, he said, to the house we had built together, to the beams in the ceiling, to the old Turkish rug from his grandmother's house, to the dogs, to the too many books, to the piano my mother gave us, to our children sleeping upstairs, and beyond the green metal roof and graying shingles, to the garden, to the cherry trees and beach roses, to the inlet and Pyramid Island, and to the mountains rising across the way, to grouse in the brush and bears in the forest and the salmon in the sea. To all of it, he said, it's really good to be home. It is, isn't it? And I think it's time to take my dogs for a walk. Thanks a lot for being here with me today, and thanks for reading what I write, and take good care of yourself and take care of the people in your community and your family, so all of us will get better soon. Now I've got to turn this off.